All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Amy Bonda Lee. I'm the Director of Educational Outreach at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, and we are proud to bring you a webinar, Reconsidering Angela Davis, Reflections on Engagement and Social Transformations. This webinar is part of the Freedom Webinar Series, an extension of the Freedom Lecture Series that we've provided here at the Freedom Center that has represented national scholars, and we are proud to add this one to our collection. I am going to introduce to you Dr. Jennifer Suchlin. She is the Associate Professor at Ohio State University and jointly appointed in the Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies and the Department of Slavic and East European Languages and Culture. She recently was an ACLS Mellon Scholars and Society Fellow at NERC here at the Freedom Center and continues to work in collaboration with the museum and community partners to advance public education about social and racial justice issues. Dr. Suchlin.
Great. Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Bonda Lee, for the introduction. And I'm really pleased to be here this evening. During my fellowship year at the museum, I met a range of amazing folks, including Dr. Jones. And I have the pleasure tonight of introducing her at the start of this program. So Dr. Sharon Jones is professor in the Department of English Language and Literatures at Wright State University and former director of the African and African American Studies program there. She earned her undergraduate and master's degrees at Clemson University and her PhD from the University of Georgia. She is the co-editor and author of numerous books, including the Prentice Hall Anthology of African American Literature, Critical Insights, Zora Neale Hurston, Rereading the Harlem Renaissance, Race, Class, and Gender in the Fiction of Jessie Fawcett, Zora Neale Hurston, and Dorothy West, and Critical Companion to Zora Neale Hurston, a literary reference to her life and work. Most recently, she has edited the volume Conversations with Angela Davis with the University of Mississippi Press, and is currently working on a project entitled Resisting Injustice, Contemporary Views on Angela Davis. Dr. Jones is the creative and intellectual force behind tonight's event, and I look forward to hearing everyone speak this evening. Thank you, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Dr. Bonda Lee, and thank you, Dr. Suchlin. I am so pleased to be here this evening for this webinar, Reconsidering Angela Davis, Reflections on Engagement and Societal Transformations. And I am pleased and honored to introduce this roundtable panel for this webinar. I am very committed to furthering the discussion and discourse on Angela Davis, and as pointed out in the chronology of Conversations with Angela Davis, was 1944 within Birmingham, Alabama. Dr. Davis received numerous degrees, and some of them include degrees from Brandeis University and also UC San Diego. Her life has involved engagement with a number of organizations. Some examples include Los Angeles chapter of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and she's written about the Black Panther Party in Angela Davis, an autobiography. Many people know of Angela Davis from the early 1970s, including when Angela Davis was on the FBI 10 Most Wanted list, and also later acquitted in 1972 of charges against her. They may also be aware of Angela Davis's vice presidential candidacy representing the Communist Party in 1980 and 1984. Or people may have read some of her books, including Angela Davis, an autobiography, which was edited by Nobel laureate Toni Morrison, Women, Race, and Class, Blues, Legacies, and Black Feminism, Gertrude Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, and Billie Holiday, Our Prisons Obsolete, which could be seen as a collaborative effort, and The Meaning of Freedom and Other Difficult Dialogues, and numerous other essays and speeches. Now I will introduce this distinguished panel. and there are 4 roundtable panelists. Dr. Kimberly Nichelle Brown is an associate professor of gender, sexuality, and women's studies at Virginia Commonwealth University, where she formerly served as chair of GSWS as well as the Department of African American Studies. And before coming to VCU, Professor Brown taught for 14 years in the Department of English at Texas A&M University, where she also co-founded and directed the Africana Studies program. Her areas of specialty are many, including contemporary African American women's literature and culture, Black feminist theory, Africana film, Afrofuturism, and 20th century American and Africana literatures. Professor Brown is the author of Writing the Black Revolutionary Diva, Women's Subjectivity and the Decolonizing Text, published by Indiana University Press in 2010. Professor Brown is currently working on 2 book-length manuscripts, Incognito Stances, Cross-Racial Espionage in Contemporary Literature and Film, under contract with the University of Mississippi Press, and Through Ebony Eyes, a Black feminist and ethical praxis of viewing contemporary film. Next, I will introduce Dr. Kimberly Lamb. Dr. Kimberly Lamb is Associate Professor of Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies at Duke University. She's the author of Dressing the Other Woman, Textual Correspondence in Feminist Art and Writing, Manchester University Press 2018, which has a chapter that explores how Angela Davis' writings challenge and erode myths about Black women that have been calcified in visual culture. Dr. Lamb is currently working on a new book project devoted to Black women writers and clothing. And she has an article forthcoming in the prestigious journal Women's Studies Quarterly, devoted to Coco Fusco's 2004 video essay about Angela Davis, AKA, or also known as Mrs. George Gilbert. Lamb argues that Fusco's video can actually be read as a love letter to Davis that addresses what often disappears behind her iconicity, her subjective singularity, her unknowability, her interiority, and her resistance to the imperative that she serve as an image that can be made to serve other people's needs. Third, Dr. Joanne Morgan is Professor Emeritus of African American Studies and Art History at Western Illinois University, and author of The Black Arts Movement and the Black Panther Party in American Visual Culture and Uncle Tom's Cabin as Visual Culture, which received a Seaborg Award for Civil War Scholarship. Since the pandemic began, Dr. Morgan has been making art related to social justice reform. A solo show of her new work, Quilted Memorials, Saying Their Names in Fabric, will be on display at the York County Art Council Dalton Gallery in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I'm actually from South Carolina, and I've been to Rock Hill. Okay. These can also be seen at www.picturingblackpower.com. And then fourth, Dr. Robyn C. Spencer. Dr. Robyn C. Spencer is a historian that focuses on Black social protest after World War II, radicalism, and gender. She is currently visiting endowed chair in Women and Gender Studies at Brooklyn College and is tenured in the Department of History at Lehman College. Her first book, The Revolution Has Come, Black Power, Gender, and the Black Panther Party in Oakland, on gender and organizational revolution of the Black Panther Party in Oakland, was a finalist for the Benjamin Hooks Institute National Book Award, sponsored by the Benjamin L. Hooks Institute for Social Change at the University of Memphis, and also received honorable mention for the Letitia Woods Brown Book Prize, sponsored by the Association of Black Women's Historians. In 2016, she received a Mellon Fellowship at Yale University to work on her second book project, To Build the World Anew, Black Liberation and Black Liberation Politics and the Movement Against the Vietnam War. The project explores how and why the anti-imperialist struggle for Vietnamese independence became a rallying point for US-based Black activists who were a part of the freedom movement of the 1950s through the 1970s. In many ways, it continues her emphasis on exploring overlapping and intersecting boundaries between social protest movements. In 2018, Dr. Spencer was also awarded a Franklin Research Grant from the American Philosophical Society the American Philosophical Society to support work on this project. In 2020 to 2021, work on this project was supported by an ACLS. Okay, so you can see we have a very distinguished roundtable panel here, and so I am very much deeply honored that they are here with us today. And what I'm going to do is I am going to begin the round table discussion here with questions for all of our panelists here related to Angela Davis and related topics. All right. And then afterwards, there will be an opportunity for a Q&A. So welcome again. Okay. So the first question, and I'm posing this question to all of our distinguished panelists, and I'm going to go just in alphabetical order here. And I may also weigh in after the fourth panelist. The first question, Dr. Brown, how and why has the scholarship and or activism of Angela Davis affected your scholarship, activism, and or teaching?
Okay, first, thank you very much for inviting me to be on this panel. And I have had a love affair in my head with Angela Davis since undergraduate days, many, many moons ago when dinosaurs roamed the earth. So it's good to revisit this now. When I was a graduate student at the University of Maryland and decided upon my dissertation topic, one of the people that I was really interested in exploring was Angela Davis. And so that dissertation project became my first book, Writing the Black Revolutionary Diva. And the third chapter is titled Constructing Diva Citizenship, the Enigmatic Angela Davis as Case Study. And so in that chapter, it was really sort of me thinking through how Angela Davis used her, well, I'm not just looking at her public performance of identity as a revolutionary, but I'm also looking at lecture notes, I'm looking at newspaper articles, and I'm thinking through the ways that Davis is always pushing back against mainstream constructions of herself as enigmatic, mainstream constructions of herself as unknowable. And the way that she's pushing back on that is something that I'm calling diva citizenship. And this is a derivative of Lauren Berlant's idea of citizenship in, what is it, the Queen of America Goes to Washington City. And that's the title of the book. Now, what I'm interested with the idea of diva citizenship is the way that Davis is always in a sort of battle with the press to reconstruct herself as sort of like a homegrown revolutionary rather than someone that is unknowable, and how she is very astute about explaining to people how the personal is political. In my teaching, I use Davis a lot as a contrast to somebody like Condoleezza Rice, for example. And I'm thinking about Carol Boyce Davies' work on Condoleezza Rice, where you're dealing with women that are probably about 10 years apart in age, that come from the same sort of background. And you have like two different people being produced from similar circumstances. And so it's important to think through how Angela Davis is forcing us to understand through her public engagement through her public engagement that she is not something that is other. Like, you're supposed to watch her, read her, and see yourself in her so that you can also become a revolutionary or an activist yourself. So that's, to me, why I'm so enamored with Angela Davis as a icon, but also as a regular person.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, for providing those insights about the connection between yourself and Angela Davis. Okay. Next, Dr. Lamb.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be here to talk about Davis. When I wrote about the ordeal that Davis went through in the early 1970s and focused specifically on the images that were produced to make the accusation of her criminality a kind of fact, basically. And I'm thinking in particular of the Life magazine image from 1971, but there's of course a number of other images as well, the wanted poster, etc. When I studied these objects, it underscored for me how much visual culture can really shape public perception. But given the fact that Davis was acquitted and the kind of the visual world that her supporters created for her through posters, through signs, through buttons, T-shirts, broadsides, etc., that showed another side of what visual culture can do. That it can intervene in dominant culture in the name of justice, in the name of revolution. So there's her story for me kind of illustrates the counter hegemonic possibility of images. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lamb, and appreciate you bringing up those images associated with Angela Davis. Next, we will have Dr. Morgan.
Hello, it's an honor to be with you all. I've read much of your work and I'm just happy to be involved in this discussion. I have worked on Angela Davis in my scholarship for, and I can hold it up, a book which was on the Black Arts Movement and the Black Panther Party in visual culture. And as the book evolved, the idea was to understand the times, understand the Black power as it existed in Oakland, which was more or less where or at least in California, through the visual culture. So black leather jackets, berets, posters, news coverage. And I was really dealing with the public output of visual culture in the beginning. As the project evolved, despite the fact that women were half of the Black Panther Party, I rarely saw them in print, their pictures. Let me thank you to Robyn, also, who's one of the rare books even that I had found, and this was towards the end of my research, that actually included a female. It was very much a phallocentric image bank. And mainstream media, especially newspapers, like to showcase the males, and sometimes the headlines read angry, militant, and they love to show the black leather and the berets and the men in formation. So for me, Angela Davis was an absolute godsend, that here was this enormous amount of imagery that I could legitimately include as part of the visual culture of the Black Panther Party and that era of late 60s, early 70s. So I don't know. I have just one picture if we want to put up. It's number one, and just for a minute, and not much to say about it. I'm sure you're all very familiar with it, but that's the image that became the iconic photo of Davis. It was used repeatedly on posters after she was arrested and for her defense. And it's a picture of her speaking at one of several times she spoke at this may have, in fact, I think it was at a Free Huey rally, but it became kind of the iconic Angela Davis. That's, you can take it down if you want or leave it. I love looking at it. But it was so influential, and it so epitomized people, mainstream viewers of visual culture at the time, of a kind of ideal womanhood. And the image really came to signify the era. And so I was really interested to just dig up all the pictures I could and try to figure out how it fit in, and what were the events that brought the image into being, and then how it was used and by who. The second part of the book, or rather it's the first part, was on the Black arts movement, and that dealt with visual art, literally paintings, etc. And I was delighted to see how much her image was used, how much she was a subject within the work of visual artists, so-called fine artists. Afra Cobra, for instance, several of those artists portrayed her. Elizabeth Catlett, Charles White, and even one of the chapters in my book was about artists in the Bay Area at the time of the Black Panther Party, and looking at their work where it wasn't called Angela Davis. And these are lesser known artists, but one was called Eve, for instance. But it was clearly the ideal Black womanhood interpreting as if they, in fact, I connected one painting with an actual news picture of Angela Davis, the exact posture and everything. So her influence in visual culture of the time was just incredible, and really a lot more varied and interesting than, not more interesting, but differently interesting than what I thought in the beginning. Just a short anecdote about teaching, which relates to Angela Davis. I am an art historian by degree. That would be UCLA, American art. And I reached a point where I really was sick of teaching the survey of European art. And I'd been developing courses that could fit into an African American studies department. And I sought and actually landed a position with an African American studies department. And so I first hired, and all of my lovely courses I'd been developing weren't exactly able to be taught that first semester, but there was something on the books called Famous People of African Descent. So it was wide open to bring in whatever I thought would be useful. And I walk into this room, and this is out in the cornfields of Western Illinois, but it's a train ride from Chicago. So there were a lot of young African American students. And there was a young woman sitting right in the front, which means, an eager beaver. And she's got a t-shirt on, and there's this big head of Angela Davis just speaking to me, visual culture speaking to me. It was much like that picture I just showed you. And so I really, it made me especially cognizant of what a lovely opportunity this was going to be to celebrate Black people and Black culture with all these young, eager students. Thank you.
So thank you. Yes, that fits the visual in with your research and also your experience teaching. So thank you so much, Dr. Morgan. And next we have Dr. Smith.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be part of such a, rich discussion, and people who have really defined the field in so many ways in terms of different perspectives and thinking about African-American women, visual culture, literatures, etc. I want to say that I first learned about Angela Davis as an undergraduate student. Of course, I read her work. And to me, she was a figure that was kind of fixated in the past. When I went to graduate school, my advisor, Manning Marable, would oftentimes talk about his relationship with Angela Davis, not in any sort of deep way, but the way that he kind of brought her into the present tense. For me, kind of was this reminder that, wow, the present is past. Angela Davis is still out here. As I went through the academy and graduated with my degree, I would see Angela Davis at conferences, at the Women's Studies Association conferences, and I saw her as a peer, as a thinker, as intellectual. Of course, as I was consuming her books ravenously for her political analysis, and also being inspired by her activism on so many different human rights issues that resonated not just nationally, but around the globe. So Angela Davis has had a huge impact on me, from even being a model for Black women's intellectual pursuits, to her commitment to being a scholar activist, to her writings and her philosophical approach and the way that she theorizes racism and discrimination, and the way that she envisions alternatives and is able to articulate that. Her role as an organizer and the way that she connects with grassroots people. I've seen her at conferences, but I've seen her also at grassroots conferences with ordinary folks. I've had the opportunity to be in her presence when she traveled to Paris, and it was amazing to sort of see the adulation and the history that she embodied to people who could remember not just Angela Davis of the 1970s, but who were continually engaging with Angela Davis, the theorist, the thinker, the academic, etc. So Angela Davis has influenced my work tremendously in a lot of ways, especially as someone who focuses on Black power and thinking about her role as someone on the left during the Black Power movement, her role as a Black woman, the way that she used her, the way that she was targeted to draw attention to so many issues and the interconnections between them, and the networks that you can see. Just like my advisor was part of her network, through looking at Angela Davis, I've seen other people, from Bettina Apteker to Charlene Mitchell to some of the other women who played such a big role in Angela Davis's life and world. So she's been a dominating figure for sure because of her her visibility, but at the same time, when you see Angela Davis, you see so many other people, you see so many other political traditions, you see this network of people, and you see a political genealogy.
Thank you so much for bringing up that idea of the quote political genealogy is so important there. And I had the opportunity to see Dr. Manning Marable years ago speak. And of course, I know Dr. Marable is no longer with us, but in other ways, Dr. Marable is through the distinguished body of work. So thank you very much for that. I'll just add in that this semester I've had the pleasure to teach a graduate seminar, English 7330, on Toni Morrison and Angela Davis at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. And so students have had the opportunity to read Angela Davis, an autobiography, and multiple texts by Toni Morrison, and also some essays by Angela Davis. And so that's been a very enriching way of having an opportunity to introduce or reintroduce Angela Davis to this group of scholars at Wright State University. And of course, my recent publication, Conversations with Angela Davis, with interviews from the 1970s up until 2016 from a variety of publications. And then the ongoing project, Resisting Injustice, Contemporary Views on Angela Davis. Okay. So the next question I want to pose to the panel, again, is, and you've touched on this, your wonderful introduction. So if you have anything additional you want to say, please feel free to do that. But what contributions has Angela Davis made in terms of facilitating dialogue and or discussion about gender, economic status, and or race? And certainly there's a lot to say, about those particular topics in relationship to Angela Davis. So I'll start again with Dr. Brown.
I think the first thing that I would say is that for me, I think that it is important to think about Davis's consistent public, well, not performance, but her role as a public intellectual. I think that she models a consistent agenic presence. She models for people what Black feminist activism can look like. She models for people, well, She models for people what it means to be a Black woman thinking. She models Black female intellectualism in a way that I don't think gets a lot of press these days. I think that, I don't know when it was, but it was probably around, I think, 2016 when 45 became president. And I think that I might have stayed in bed for like 2 weeks after the election. I was one of those people who had an election party because I just knew that he was going to lose. And, I'm glad I didn't bet any money on that. But very shortly after, Angela Davis came to Virginia Commonwealth University and also to Virginia Museum of Fine Arts to talk about the election. And the way that she talked about it was very invigorating in the sense that I had become devoid of all hope. And then she explained how this was a moment of possibility and sort of outlined the ways in which it made us really think through our democratic principles, made us think through what it means to do activism in a time of urgency, right? That I thought was very helpful for the students. And Richmond as a community has a very strong history of grassroots community activism. And I think that it was good for people at large to see her speaking about the election and what our next steps should be. Like, do we throw up our hands or do we get down into the nitty gritty work of trying to create a more equitable future in the face of 45 and his reign? And then I think the final thing that I would say on that is I want to think about how Davis is, and this will bleed into something else, I'm quite sure, has been on like the precipice or the forefront of prison activism. And people talk about that a lot, but I also think that particularly in this time period, it's important to think about the work that she did in public also about thinking through rape laws, right? Like I'm thinking about stuff that she's written about Joanne Little, landmark court cases that reframe how we think about victims of rape and how they should conduct themselves or comport themselves in a courtroom setting. And I think that when we see a lot of laws being rescinded state by state with regards to issues of rape, it's important to remember those earlier voices when she was weighing in and think about how that could be useful now. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I mean, you brought it to contemporary times about how Angela Davis has just been consistently a voice for justice in so many ways, and the idea of grassroots community activism and the election and law. So thank you. Next, we will have Dr. Lamb.
Yeah, hi. When I read this question, I thought immediately of reflections on the Black women's role in the community of slaves from 1971, and Davis's insights. There's many insights in that essay, but particularly the insight about the annulment of gender and the distorted equality inflicted upon enslaved women. That became a part of Hortense Spiller's now classic essay, Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, an American Grammar book, and her concept of ungendering. And then more recently, Saidiya Hartman with her essay, Belly of the World, Notes on Black Women's Labor, taken up both Davis and Spiller's. And the Belly of the World is this wonderful scholarly manifesto about the reproductive labor that came out of the sexual and reproductive exploitations of Black women's bodies and enslavement, and how that reverberates into the present and can be understood as the origin of low wages and difficult economic conditions for women of color. And so, I think, with that essay, I think she opened up really a kind of a whole world of Black feminist scholarship, and that's just one trajectory in it, from Davis to Spillers to Hartman.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lamb, for showing that trajectory and commenting on Davis's writing and also the influence on other scholars, so we can see that kind of trajectory and continuity. So thank you. Next, Dr. Morgan.
I don't have a great deal to say about this, but I have something that I find somewhat interesting from my own recent research. And Dr. Jones, it's for an essay in your book, which has been really fun to be researching. It's caused me to look at Davis's first experience at UCLA, which really brought her into the public spotlight, and to see her as adversarial partner in all of that, the Governor Ronald Reagan, who opposed her being hired. And I think she already was, well, she offered an example of his adversary that was based on both her political view, her gender, her, you could say, class, economic status based on her education, and of course her race. And it occurs to me that it's really interesting that these identities that made her his target ultimately worked in her favor and gave her constituencies, broad constituencies, that ultimately gave her a platform for her speaking, and which were there when she needed support in her defense. In the job trials that year and then later. And I was thinking about that. I don't have much more to say than that I find it kind of interesting how he wanted to demonize her, and that only solidified her. I don't know, I can't say it made her stronger, but it made her a role model, and never apologizing for her convictions. She could have sort of demurred on being called a communist, but she stood up for it and articulated in the press why it mattered and why it mattered as a Black woman. And back to 45, if you will, Trump. And I was thinking of Trump coming down the escalator to demean Mexicans when he first kind of entered his race. That Reagan in many ways was the pre-Trump. And he used Angela Davis to be able to demonize these various groups, from which he then, those biases, helped him establish a base. And, sort of see it, I see a real similarity. So I don't know if there's anything to learn from the past, and maybe Angela Davis as an example of how she survived him, but I find it interesting. And I had noted what I thought was important to say, of course, that she's been an absolute role model for so many and for those various constituencies, which are broad.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan, for bringing that up about the different constituencies, and also looking at the political aspect of it as well in relationship to Dr. Davis, but also, taking a very intersectional approach as well. And yes, your contribution to the book, Resisting Injustice, Contemporary Views on Angela Davis, is very much appreciated, as well as the other contributions. Okay, next we will have Dr.
Perfect. Well, it's great to go last so I can capture some of these great comments. Yes, Angela Davis has contributed so much to what Dr. Brown highlighted as Black women thinkers. And Dr. Brown also mentioned Carol Boyce Davies' critical work on Condoleezza Rice. I want to highlight her work on Claudia Jones, and thinking about Black women theorizing, that Angela Davis kind of represents the Black woman theorist, which has oftentimes been, made invisible in the political and intellectual tradition, we're more open to see the Black woman activist, right? But when we're thinking about a school of thought or a way of conceptualizing and breaking down power, I mean, that is what Angela Davis has offered throughout her public life. And I want to highlight that much of that has been done under the umbrella of Marxism, under the umbrella of feminism, that she represents, and she makes concrete, I think, ideals about, well, what is feminism anyway? You know, as we see feminism being bandied about in popular culture, and the struggle to define what is a feminist, what is a Black feminist, what is the Black feminist tradition, Angela Davis reminds us of all of that and brings to it a critique of US political economy, of capitalism. And it's those intellectual tenterhooks that I feel like that she sort of captures the moment of what is happening now in terms of US history, in terms of this global moment that we are in. So that's what I want to be like one of the major takeaways for anyone listening, is that Angela Davis, as a theorist, as someone who was in a Marxist organization, in the Communist Party, ran for office from that party, founded the committees of correspondence of the Democratic Socialists of America. She's continually engaged with an institutionalized left. And that's important to know that history, because socialism and being a socialist as a dirty word, as a slur, gained new life under 45, as we've all been discussing. So I see that as one of the major contributions that she made, and she continues to make.
Thank you so much. That is so important. Yes, the connection with Marxism, the critique of capitalism, the way in which she has, analyzed power structures so much throughout her life. And, I was thinking about this idea of one of the things about Angela Davis is Angela Davis is a philosopher, and I think sometimes that doesn't receive, a whole lot of attention. But yes, the fact that she's very much rooted in activism and intellectual activity, and scholar and activist, but what Angela Davis has contributed to the life of people in terms of thinking about the complex and nuanced ways in which we have to address issues related to race and class and gender in very powerful and potent ways through her teaching, her scholarship, through her activism, through interviews, and through speaking. So just in so many ways, when I think about, in terms of my goals as a scholar, I so often look to Angela Davis, who also, reminds us of the importance of how it takes community and collaboration to, address and analyze the complicated nature of gender, class, economics, and race. Okay, this has just been such a rich and vibrant discussion. And as I'm tracking this in terms of our program, we have reached the point in our program today where I think we are, it's
I know that Sharon will come back. I think she was going to say that we're at the point in our program where we want to open up to the audience. There's still a few questions that we were going to have dialogue amongst ourselves as a panel, but it may be time to let some of the hundreds of folks who are watching have their say and have us respond to what they're saying. So I'm guessing that Jennifer will help facilitate that.
Great. Yeah, I think that she'll be hopefully back here just in a moment, but I've been logging the many questions that people have been posting in the chat, and I want to thank you all for the great discussion so far. One question that I thought we could start with, folks want to know a little bit more about what your understanding is of the impact of Angela Davis, what impact she's had specifically on the current movement for Black lives. And dovetailing with that, I think, is also the question of her ongoing, the legacy of and the ongoing impact of her activism and writing on abolition and the critiques of the prison industrial complex. So maybe we could start with that question, looking specifically at her impact on the current movement for Black lives and abolition work. Should maybe do the same order that Dr. Jones had set up before, if you like, starting with Dr. Brown.
Okay. This question is, I think, a little bit harder for me because I don't know that I fully know, right? I think that what I will say right now, I teach a course, one of the courses I teach is called Black Feminist Thought after Patricia Hill Collins' groundbreaking work. And this is thankfully our last week of class. Oh God, I can't wait. But one of the things that we're reading is Miriam Kaba, We Do This Until They Free Us. And students really respond to that. And she is very clear about being indebted to Angela Davis for her ideas about prison abolition. And so in previous incarnations, when I've taught African-American literature, I've often taught her autobiography. And we do a lot of stuff comparing the autobiography to earlier slave narratives. And I keep coming back to that idea of Davis being sort of part of our usable past and still very much active in terms of her agianic presence, right? Like, so we don't have to kind of think through what Davis would have done in this particular moment, but we have to kind of like, she's right here, so we could just ask her. So I think that having her as a person to speak back and forth to with the Black Lives Matter movement is really important. But there's so much noise in between these discussions sometimes that it becomes a horrible thing to kind of think through, because sometimes you have people who are actually denigrating Davis and not thinking that she's doing enough for Black Lives Matter. And so there are a lot of things that happen on social media where people are like talking about her saying don't vote, and and there is a lot of misinformation, right, that's not really about like Davis's own public platform that you have to sift through. So I don't really know that I'm the best person to answer this, but I will start that as I will use it as a starting point for that for this discussion to go further, hopefully.
I could add, I'm not sure who's the moderator right now.
Go right ahead.
Okay. One of our questions that I gather we won't get to was to come up with nouns, adjectives, or verbs to describe Angela Davis. And I had fearless, and I had some examples of that, but I also came up with shy scholar, which was something I got from a book by Bettina Apteker, writing, I don't have the date handy, but a good while ago, called The Morning Breaks. And she called Angela Davis in manner and temperament a scholar. She is shy and etc. And that everything, like her lectures were well prepared. She always took notes, everything with great care and precision, etc. So I think expecting her to be out in the streets as a Black Lives Matter rabble rouser, no, I don't mean rabble rouser, but as a spokesperson in a public forum, I think the battleground can be academia. It can be an arena for Black Lives Matter. And I kind of liked that thought that really we aren't all, like I've never seen Angela Davis on MSNBC, for instance, but there's a lot of other people come on. I don't think it's her forte. I could be wrong, I don't know. No, but she did speak, by the way, at the Women's March after the election. But I think expecting her strong activism in Black Lives Matter is really not honoring her gifts. And I thought it was interesting. At heart, what was she? As a majored in French language and then philosophy, and she was a scholar. She was a lifelong university professor. I would add, I was talking to someone recently and about Angela Davis, who knew of her from the 60s, and just mentioning that, I was looking into it and then I was going to do this roundtable. And this is an educated friend of mine, but that person didn't know she had been a college professor. I think a lot of people have in their mind something that in a way was that public persona that got created. So, I'd just like to put in a pitch to really value academia as a place to advance Black Lives Matter theory.
I was going to say too that it seemed like Davis saw from very early on in her intellectual life that the prison and the prison industrial complex was a reiteration of enslavement, and that's an idea that has really that I think is present now and is very much discursively available, but she was articulating that quite early. And so the continuities that she draws between, the police state and patrolling and enslavement, et cetera, is, I think, important for thinking about her connection to Black Lives Matter. I also think with her attention to the difference that gender makes and the specific experiences of women in prison industrial complex, I think that resonates with Say Her Name and the kind of the effort that Kimberly Crenshaw and others have made to pay attention to the murders of Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor and kind of keep gender on the table, because the way in which it's tricky area, but the way in which violence against Black men become the emblem of violence against Black people, and then what that can leave out. I think that she's an important precursor for that thinking.
And one thing that I want to add is that when we think about Angela Davis, important to remember she was born in 1944. So her life kind of represents this kind of trajectory of the Black freedom movement, of human rights and liberation movements in the US. So it makes sense to me that at this moment that there is a sense of fractiousness, a sense of cooperation, conflict, a sense of inspiration sometimes, contestation other times. As Angela Davis has evolved and as the new cycles of social movements come up with their own ideologies and things like that, some of which are drawn from the past. I mean, one thing I can say is that the Black Lives Matter movement and all of its manifestations, even today, really been sort of inspired by the 60s movements, from the Malcolm X's to the Panthers, et cetera, et cetera. So there is kind of this embrace of history, but there's also a reckoning with history as well. And Angela Davis's ability to still be a frontline activist around issues on Palestine, around issues of the carceral state, around so many issues, defining what radical Black feminism is and has been an asset. So she's provided more, I think, for the movement to grapple with in some ways. Yet she's also, I think, suffered from the reality of, unlike people who have passed on and you can just have their sound bites, right, their quotes, the Malcolm X's or even Assata Shakur, who is certainly still with us, but because of her position in exile, she's not producing position statements and, engaging in the day-to-day political world in a particular way. So Angela Davis has, so it provides fodder for critics. It provides fodder for critical thinking. It provides ways forward and paths forward. And I think that's the exciting thing. I think about people like Grace Lee Boggs, Ella Baker, these people who were generationally a little bit ahead of the activists that they were inspiring, but were always students as well as teachers. They saw themselves in both of those roles. And that's what I would say about Angela Davis. I feel like she is open, right? She is open. She listens as much as she speaks and tries to, she's not someone who's just here to solve or a pontificator, but with humility, she has also, I think, been listening to this new movement and all of its manifestations and figuring out which way she can best be involved to forward the ideals that she believes in.
Dr. Jones, did you want to come back into the conversation on that question? I've got my eye on the time, and I'll make sure that you are able to enter the conversation as you wish now.
Okay. Yes. So, I mean, I've just very much just found this all so enriching. I was thinking about how I have taught Angela Davis an autobiography a number of times. And when I was rereading it again most recently, after teaching it again this semester, I started thinking about Angela Davis engaging in Black Lives Matter work before, we had the Black Lives Matter, phrase being bandied about, with so much of what she writes about that she was involved with in California in the 1960s, looking at issues of race and class and social justice. And I mean, so much of what she has done has just really brought things full circle. I say that for me, Angela Davis is someone who is, never out of time, always on time, because so many of the topics that she wrestles with are still relevant today.
Absolutely. There are lots of questions here, and I'm afraid there's not a lot of time left, but one thing that you all have already talked about that I just would uplift from the chat is the immense impact that she's had outside of the United States, both in terms of activist movements and other parts of the world, including Palestine, but also just across the Black diaspora. And that's something that you all raised in some of your comments. Dr. Jones, did you want to end on another note, perhaps the verbs or adjectives that best describe Angela Davis?
Yes, I would love to do that. And I would say dedicated and committed. I would say a global person. I would say somebody who has just worked tirelessly on behalf of social justice, not only in the United States, but abroad as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many people worldwide to this day still look to honor and are, interested in Angela Davis. The current book project that I'm working on is looking at Angela Davis from intersectional and/or transnational perspectives. So I think that is very, very important. So I would also say, I guess, adjectives: intersectional, transnational.
Great. Do others want to add their last thoughts on adjectives, adverbs, inspirationals? I heard a lot of inspirational. Please, yes, please, Dr.
Okay.
Morgan.
Well,
Sorry, I had muted myself.
I already spoke to the shy scholar as one of my adjectives, and I had a quote from her autobiography that kind of supports that idea of the academia as a battlefield. And the quote reads, although they did not often admit it, the ruling circles feared the educational approach far more than they feared the rhetorical threats to off the pigs. And I think that kind of supports that idea that she did well in academia, and maybe that really was her place, or her place of most influence. And then here's the other word I came up with, which was fearless. And it occurred to me during the year she was battling for her job. I don't know how to say that. The year Reagan was causing her a lot of grief, and she was in the newspaper, frequently, and Defense Fund and Students in Support, and it was very active. But she started getting a lot of death threats, and that's why she bought weapons, and that's part of why that's a long series of events to why she was arrested. I won't reiterate all of that, but I want to say she was fearless, because during this time where she's fighting the battle with all these, the Board of Regents, Reagan, and then on the run, and then her legal case, the police and the FBI were killing Black activists. And I was thinking of Panther Fred Hampton, December 4th, 1969. That's during her year of battling at UCLA. Alex Rackley in New Haven. That was May 20th, 1969. And these are people who were set up and murdered by the police and FBI. It really was something that could have happened to her for a long time. But you just see her strong and outspeaking and just doing what she was following her convictions. So fearless.
Is there still time left, or can we say some more, or are we done?
I'm not sure. I think we could ask our museum hosts, as I think people would love to stay. All of the words in the chat are just amazing, both praise for all of you panelists, but also just this opportunity to really uplift Angela Davis and all the important work that she has done and continues to do. And so I think we can keep going till 6:10. We just got a message. So yeah, Dr. Brown, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think that the word that I would use would be kind. So I'm not just really talking about, like, if you were to meet her and her kind of warm way of dealing with people, but I'm thinking about, like, a lot of times we talk, and rightly so, about Bell Hooks and her whole sort of platform about, like, love as an ethic. But I think that Angela Davis also should be in that particular type of conversation, because I don't really think that it's like an either or proposition. It's not really the academy or the streets. I really believe that it's really the way that she connects both, and uses theory to uplift people as a site of liberation, uses theory to connect people and to reveal to people what's actually happening to them, right? Like, and so then to me, that's like a labor of love. That's an ethic of love that is about attending to the needs of people in a very sort of real and concrete way.
I like to think of Angela Davis as a leader, because I think that oftentimes, again, we exalt these women, but we don't ever look to them or imagine them in that role of leader. And I would like to think about how a thinker, a writer is also a type of leader. I want to highlight the organizations that she's been part of and the mobilizations that she continues to support, whether it be the labor movement, whether it be speaking out against settler colonialism as well. So I see her as a leader, really using her ability to draw connections to analyze and to put different phrases and concepts into the public sphere, like abolition, right? Which is not, I'm not saying that she, came up with it, certainly not, but in terms of defining it, in terms of bringing it back into a particular type of discourse, using it to illuminate, offering it out for activists to continually refine. She's done that, not alone in conjunction with others, but even looking around Angela Davis, I think, like I said, is a fruitful exercise for the networks of people that represent the type of leadership that she represents. She's not the charismatic, singular, spotlighted male leadership model that we're used to, right? But she is an organizer. She is someone who speaks in passionate but reasoned tones as well. And I think it's important to open our ears, open our eyes to not just Angela Davis, but to the Angela Davises in our midst, and to listen to them, hear them, raise their voices, especially if they happen to be under 30 years old.
Yeah, I would add to these great comments that the word intact, and I mean, one thing that engaging with Coco Fusco's video essay about Davis, aka Mrs. George Gilbert, is you see from the footage of her when she was going through the trial that she's obviously a human being. She was rattled, and but she also held on to herself and held on to her vision of justice, and so I think with so many people who might have gone through something of the ordeal that she went through, there could be a defensiveness, there could be an inability to listen to other people, and I don't think that I don't think that that's the case with her. Dr. Jones's book with the conversations really testify to how much she listens to other people, listens to younger people, listens to people that she disagrees with, and I think that is something to really admire about her. At the same time, I'm always reluctant to like heroicize her too much, because one of the consistent things that she always does is to pivot away from herself as an individual and as kind of an icon, and move out towards the broader collectives that she wants to be a part of. But I do think her intactness has something to do with the skills that she brings to her political and intellectual leadership.
Thank you all. Dr. Jones, would you like to say some concluding thoughts or words?
Yes, I would. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing opportunity to look at Angela Davis in relationship to scholarship, activism, history, solidarity, race, gender, class, and so many myriad issues. And we can see the way in which Angela Davis has influenced and affected the people on the panel, the people involved with this webinar, and the people who are attending this particular webinar and event. And I feel like people are going to continue to be discussing, this over the next days and months and even years. So I think that what we have learned today from this particular webinar is that it is still very important for us, if we're going to think about issues related to equity and social justice, to understand the role that Angela Davis has played, but also our own role in relationship to those ideas. And that's something that I really hold on to, because one of the things Angela Davis has articulated is the idea that if we are interested in making change, we can do that right now, today, and that's a very important way to think about that. And I did want to thank so many people who have been involved with this. The panelists, Dr. Brown, Dr. Lamb, Dr. Morgan, Dr. Spencer. I want to thank Dr. Suchland. I want to thank Chris Miller. I want to thank Dr. Bonda Lee. I want to thank Sarah Donato. I want to thank the Ohio State University, the Wright State University, Department of English Language and Literatures, the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. I also want to thank the audience out there, and I want to thank Jonathan Turbin as well. And I want to thank Angela Davis. So that's just what I want to say. But thank you all for spending this time with us. And I feel it's so important to feel like one has community. And I have definitely felt a sense of community this evening. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.